Heraclon Publishing presents Emancipated Women by Bolesław Prus. Translated by Stephanie Kraft. Read for you by Sachi Lovatt. Book 2, Volume 1. Chapter 1. Return.
Miss Magdalena, time to wake up!
Magda heard these words together with the rattle of the train, the clanging of chains, and the rapid panting of the locomotive. But, lulled by the swaying motion of the car in which she rode, she could not open her eyes just yet. Then there was a clatter at the window, and a refreshing current of air blew in. She rubbed her eyes, sighing. As her torpor cleared away, Magda became aware of where she was. She was sitting in the corner of a first-class compartment, and opposite her, her companion, the county administrator's wife, was inspecting herself in a small mirror, washing her face with cologne, and smoothing her hair. Outside the train it was a fine, sunny morning.
"Good morning, ma'am."
Good morning, dear Miss Magdalena. How well you slept! After a bath and after a cry, one always sleeps well." "Is it still a long way to Warsaw?" Magda inquired. "It is the next stop." Magda stepped unsteadily to the window and looked out. Mown fields, on the stubble, dewdrops sparkled with light that quickly died. The trees that flew back behind the train were an unhealthy green, as if autumn had set in earlier in this place than in Ikshunov. Now and then a cottage surrounded by a picket fence gleamed white between the fields. A few tall chimneys could be seen in the distance. And at the very edge of the horizon sprawled a gigantic gray cloud divided into 3 smoky layers. The lowest lay across the banks of the Vistula, the middle one seemed to rest on the slopes above the river, and the highest one hovered over the rooftops and spires of Warsaw, which looked like a mysterious range of toothed hills with rocks leaping out here and there. "It is beautiful air you have in this Warsaw," remarked Magda's companion. "I am sure that within 2 days I will have black lungs. Heavens! How can you live here?" "But you see, ma'am, that the closer we come, the more the smoke disperses. Oh, the tower of the Evangelical Church! On the left, Holy Cross. On the right, the Church of the Virgin Mary. Clearer every second." "Thank you, Lord, for such clarity. I would die here in a year. You must return to Ikshunov at the beginning of the next vacation. There, they are already sounding the whistle. In a moment we will get off. I will take you wherever you need to go." Having spoken, the lady began hurriedly removing her bags, boxes, and parasols from the baggage rack. The train slowed. The chatter of passengers could be heard. The conductors opened the doors. "Warsaw?" "You there, a comfortable cab," called Magda's companion, handing a porter a stack of odds and ends. Over the porter's shoulders, Magda spied a small, slender woman in a dark gown. Her worried face seemed familiar. "Magda?" the worried-looking person exclaimed, stretching out her hands. "Zanetta," Magda answered. "What are you doing here?" "I have come for you." "How did you know I was coming back?" "You telegraphed Miss Malinovska, and she sent me here as her proxy." The ladies fell so violently into each other's embraces that they became one solid object, blocking the foot traffic on the platform. A small cart bumped into them, a conductor nudged them, and finally the porter came over and reluctantly separated them with the county administrator's wife's parasol. "So I am no longer needed," said that lady, and then she, too, seized Magda in an embrace. "Goodbye, then, Miss Magdalena, but only until the end of next June at the latest. I say goodbye not only for myself but for the whole town, and for my husband, whose head you also turned. Oh, we will have a row in Ikshunov." The porter took Magda's things, and she and Zanetta went into the passengers' hall.
Heavens, how lovely you look, Magda, said Zanetta. And someone spread a rumor here that you died in April. From April to August you had a holiday. I congratulate you. You must have made the most of it, did you not?
I did not even see my little sister, Magda said. What news of you?
None. The school is so crowded that Miss Malinowska does not want to accept new pupils. But what changes! In the apartments that were Ada Solska's and Mrs. Ladder's there are bedrooms now. Miss Malinowska's mother is the housekeeper, and Miss Malinowska herself has only one room besides the salon for receiving visitors. Do you hear? The headmistress in one room!
She must have less income than Mrs. Ladder.
I doubt it, replied Miss Zanetta. Though imagine, she charges 50 rubles a year less for the day students and 100 less for the boarding students. She has raised our wages, and the food is better, much better.
That is excellent.
Miss Zanetta sighed. But the restrictions are terrible. The boarding students are not allowed to go out for visits. We may only receive guests in the general drawing room. At 9 in the evening everyone must be in. This would be no place for Joanna. It is a convent. Magda's baggage was brought, and the women got into a cab.
How these city cabs lurch! I shall go flying out, Magda exclaimed. The dust, the dirty air.
And it seems to me that the air is wonderful today, smiled Zanetta. I have not been in the country for so long that I probably would not be able to breathe there, she added pensively.
Is Miss Howard at the school? Magda inquired.
What are you saying? Miss Malinowska has no room for radicals.
The voices, the noise, unbearable Warsaw. And have you heard nothing of the Solskis or of Helena Norska? Asked Magda, blushing.
They are all still abroad, but they will return before long, said Zanetta. Ada wants to earn a doctorate in natural science, and Helena is reportedly engaged to her brother. But they are constantly breaking it off by mutual consent. Helena is going to be as demanding as Mrs. Ladder, and Solski is jealous. I understand none of it. Please turn in at the gate and drive into the courtyard, she called to the cabman.
A few minutes later, Magda, her heart pounding, was walking up the front of the stairs. She knew so well. Inside the school, she was struck by the silence in the corridors and the absence of boarding students, who in the past had always been milling through the halls.
Is the headmistress in her apartment?
Zanetta asked a grizzled man who stood near the stairs, wearing a black coat fastened at the neck and holding himself erect as a soldier. The headmistress, he responded, then suddenly went silent. The door opened, and a man, bowing profusely, moved backward out of the room from the depths of which Miss Malinowska's mild voice could be heard.
For from the moment a pupil enters a school, she may not go out to town.
There are no exceptions? Asked the gentleman, still bowing.
None.
The man walked quickly down the stairs, leaving Magda in full view of Miss Malinowska. She wore the same dark gown. She had the same serene face as half a year ago, but her beautiful eyes had taken on the color of steel.
Ah, it is Miss Brzeska,
she said, and kissed Magdalena on the forehead.
Can you go with me at 5 o'clock to your young ladies?
Yes, indeed, ma'am.
Miss Annetta, see to Miss Brzeska.
May I greet my old students? Magda asked diffidently.
Yes, indeed. Pyotr, some breakfast for Miss Brzeska? Then you may send the letter I gave you this morning.
To Mrs. Korkovich, interposed the upright gentleman.
In this letter I am informing Mrs. Korkovich that you have arrived, and that we will be with her at 5,
Miss Malinowska said to Magda, and went upstairs. Stunned, Magda looked at Zanetta. Seeing that the headmistress had disappeared into the corridor on the floor above, Zanetta nodded and whispered, "Yes, you see?" Now another door opened ever so slightly, and in the narrow aperture a little slip of a girl appeared. She gave a sign with her hands and whispered,
Miss Magdalena!" Magda and Zanetta went into a spacious room where a group of girls, large and small, had gathered. "The headmistress says that you may greet Miss Magdalena," Zanetta said. The girls descended on Magda from every side, kissing her and jostling for her attention. "We saw you through the window when you drove up. Have you come to stay with us?" "No, with the Korkovich girls." "Oh, if you knew how strict they are with us! Do you know, miss, that Zosia Piaseska died in July?" "I have perfect grades and got the first prize," a beautiful brunette with velvety eyes said in a voice louder than the others. "My Malvinka, do not praise yourself so." "And, my Kosya, do not interfere. After all, I was Miss Magdalena's pupil, so it will please her to learn that I am the cleverest in the whole school. Do you know, miss, that poor Miss Mania Levinska never finished the sixth form?"
"Ah, Wabenska, how are you?" Magda exclaimed. "Why didn't she finish?"
"She has to stay with her uncle, Melnitsky. You remember, miss, the very portly gentleman? He was paralyzed after Mrs. Latter's death, and Manya nurses him." "Miss has forgotten about me, and I so long for Miss."
"Oh no, Zofia!"
"I have so much to tell you. Come over here with me."
She led Magda to the window and began to whisper.
"If you see him, for he will return before long."
"Who, Zofia?"
"Oh, that man, Kazimierz Shnorsky."
"And you still think of him? In sixth form?" said Magda, shocked.
"I was just going to say that I do not think of him at all. 100 times over, 1,000 times, I prefer Mr. Romanovich. Ah, miss, what a beautiful beard he grew over the holidays."
"You are a child, Zofia."
"Oh, not at all, for I can see when someone is contemptible. Let him marry that Mongol—"
"Let who marry whom?" Magda asked, turning pale.
"Let Kazimierz marry Ada Solska,"
Zofia answered. "Who has told you such a foolish thing?"
"No one has told me because no one knows, but I have a premonition in my heart. Oh, they are not staying in Zurich for nothing."
There was a knock at the door. The girls scurried away like sparrows before a hawk. A maid appeared and informed Magda that her breakfast was ready. In the headmistress's room, Magda found herself face to face with a slender, white-haired, but very active old lady.
"I am the hostess here," the elderly woman said cheerfully, "and in my daughter's name I invite Miss—"
Moved by a resemblance between the old lady and Mrs. Brzeska, Magda kissed her hand.
"Please be seated. I apologize, but I do not remember your name."
"Magdalena."
"Please be seated, Miss Magdalena. I will pour you some coffee, for you must be tired, and I will butter a roll for you. I know just how—"
"Thank you very much, but I do not eat it with butter," whispered Magda, who wanted to put her benefactress to as little expense as possible.
"You do not want butter?" the housekeeper marveled. "Heaven forbid that Felunia should find out about this. She says that bread without butter is worth nothing. Everyone must eat butter here."
So Magda ate her roll with butter and felt a wordless longing in her heart. At her parents' home, during tea time in the summer house, everyone had also eaten buttered rolls with coffee. What was the Major doing now? The vicar? Her mother and father? Oh, how hard it was to leave home! The old lady, perhaps divining her visitor's wistfulness, remarked, "Perhaps you will stay in Warsaw for several years, as we are doing. Felunia has not been to the country for quite a long time." "Oh, no, ma'am," Magda protested. "I will return home, perhaps in a year, because I intend to open a school," she added quietly.
"In Warsaw?"
the elderly woman asked quickly, looking at Magda apprehensively. "Oh, no, in Ikshonov."
"Ikshonov? Ikshonov? We have no pupils from Ikshunov. Ha! Perhaps this is a good thing. You might send us young ladies who are ready for the upper grades."
"Naturally, I would only send them here," Magda replied. The old woman appeared at ease again. The door between this room and the adjoining salon was ajar. The headmistress entered the salon, followed by another lady. "I've decided to pay with 400 rubles," the woman said. "It is difficult to know what to do."
"I have no place for your daughter. That place was filled yesterday," the headmistress responded.
There was a moment of silence. "How can that be? Indeed, there is room for one more bed in such ample quarters," the lady faltered.
"No, ma'am. There is a direct correlation here between the number of pupils and the size of the living area. Girls must have air or they will be anemic, and I will not have anemia." The lady rose with a clear intention of leaving, and said in an irritated tone,
"Mrs. Ladder was never so uncompromising. Good day."
"And it went very badly with her. Good day,"
the headmistress retorted, escorting the woman out to the hall. Magda was astonished at Miss Malinovska's resoluteness, and still more at her mother's expressions. During the conversation in the salon, the elderly woman's face registered anxiety, pride, anger, and delight by turns.
"She has always been like that, Felunia," said her mother, folding her hands and shaking her head to emphasize the depths of her feelings. "What an exceptional woman! Is it not so, Miss— I beg your pardon?"
"Magdalena," Magda prompted.
"Yes, Miss Magdalena, I beg your pardon. But is it not the case that Felunia is an extraordinary woman? I, at least, never met such another in the world."
The headmistress appeared on the threshold.
"What now, mamma?" she said. "Does the Gnivosh girl's linen match with the required list?" "She has plenty of linen," the older woman replied, "but she has not made out a list. As usual, she will not go for a walk today. Instead, she will go over her linen with you and make a list, which she will give to her father to sign when he visits her. This everlasting muddle."
Then Miss Malinovska turned her calm eyes toward Magda.
"Now then, Miss Magdalena, your things are in Ada Solska's former room, which you may occupy until 5 o'clock. You are free until then."
Magda thanked the elderly lady for breakfast and went to Ada's old room. There she found her trunk and box, a huge basin of water, and a snowy white towel, but not a single soul. Obviously everyone was busy. No one thought of keeping her company. Brr! How chilly it was here! The clatter of the train still rang in Magda's ears. The soot from the smoking locomotive was still on her, and she could still not accustom herself to the thought that she was in Warsaw. Standing in the center of the room, she closed her eyes and tried to imagine that she had still not left Ikshunov. Outside the door she could hear a rustling. Perhaps her mother was walking by. Someone cleared his throat. It was surely her father or the major. And what was that? Ah, it was the shrill sound of a barrel organ. How she wanted to cling to someone at that moment, to kiss and be kissed. If someone would at least speak to her, would listen as she told how good they had been to her at home, and how she missed them now. Oh, for one word of comfort, and there was none. None. People hurried quietly, wordlessly through the hall. Now and then a driver standing by the stairs hemmed or coughed. Sultry air steamed through the open casement, and from a distance away, down the next street, came the strains of the barrel organ. Oh, my room, my garden, my fields! Even our cemetery is not as dreary as this building. Even the grave of that poor man who killed himself is not as empty as this room, thought Magda, barely restraining herself from bursting into tears. If only some memento of Ada remained in the room! But there was nothing.
Even the wallpaper had been torn away and the walls painted a steely color that reminded her of Miss Malinovska's tranquil eyes. But as Magda was changing her clothes, Zanetta came in. "Ah, at last!" cried Magda, stretching out her hands to this woman with her perpetually worried air, in whom she had never taken a special interest in the past, but who seemed very dear at this moment. "I have come to say good-bye, for very soon I am going out with a class to the botanical garden, and we may not see each other later." "You cannot come to me again?" Magda exclaimed sorrowfully. "I cannot. I am on duty." "And may I not go on the walk with you?" Magda asked in the tone of one who begs a favor. "I do not know," replied Zanetta, looking more worried than usual. "Ask Miss Malinovska. Perhaps she will allow it." "Good-bye, then," Magda said sadly. Dreadful as it was to be alone in this pale room, she feared still more approaching the headmistress with such a request. She was so busy, and what if she refused, or consented unwillingly? "Are you ill?" Zanetta asked suddenly. "I will tell someone, and a doctor will come directly." "For God's sake, Zanetta, say nothing. Nothing is the matter with me." "But your face looks so strange," said Zanetta. Slightly shrugging her shoulders, she took her leave. After her friend left, Magda was alone again with her thoughts, which so unnerved her that she resolved to take a bold step. She left the room and hurried down the corridor on tiptoe, looking around her like a person about to commit a criminal act. In the linen closet she found the headmistress's mother and said, blushing, "Please, ma'am, I have some free time. Perhaps I could help you with something?" The old lady was counting linen in the company of a boarding student with reddened eyelids. She raised astonished eyes to Magda. "Dear Miss, I beg your pardon, Miss Magdalena. What could you help me with? Surely Femcha could sooner find something for you to do. She is in the office." And she resumed her tally of the linen, saying to the student, 15 handkerchiefs. Have you written it, my child?" "I have written it," the girl whispered, rubbing her eyes with ink-stained fingers. "You must write clearly, dear, very clearly." Magda left the linen closet and went with great trepidation to the office, where she found Miss Malinovska bent over her desk, writing letters. At the sound of footsteps, the headmistress looked around. "Excuse me, ma'am, is there something I could help you with?" Magda asked quietly. Miss Malinovska looked at her keenly, as if she were trying to guess what lay behind Magda's willingness to be of assistance. "Well, well," she said. "My dear, take advantage of the few hours of freedom that remain to you. You will have plenty of work." After this dismissal, Magda quickly returned to her room, aggrieved and embarrassed. To avoid giving way to desperation, she took all her things out of her trunk, books and copybooks, and began to rearrange them. This activity, though it required little mental effort, restored her peace of mind. Only today had she learned the difference between her family's home, where everyone had time to pay her loving attentions, and a strange house where no one even had a moment to speak to her. Around 3 o'clock there was a commotion in the hall. The students had returned from the walk and were going to the afternoon dinner. From the sound of their movements, Magda concluded that they were marching in pairs and chatting quietly. At such a moment, in Mrs. Ladder's time, the hall would have been filled with the sounds of laughter, stamping, running. Today there was none of that. All at once it occurred to her that no one had invited her to lunch. "They have forgotten about me," she thought. The blood rushed to her face, her eyes filled with tears, and she was seized with a frantic desire to go back to Ikshunov. "Home, home! I don't want Miss Malinovska or her patronage, or, above all, her hospitality. My mother would not treat a beggar who found himself in her house this way at dinner time. I have 90 rubles in notes and some coins from the major, so I can go back. And in Ikshunov, though I would only earn 15 rubles a month, no one would treat me discourteously. So Magda told herself, walking around the room feverishly, but on tiptoe. She was afraid that someone would hear her footsteps and remember that she was there. She wanted them all to forget her, wanted the walls to move apart and release her from this alien place without anyone's noticing. Good heavens, why did I come here? She whispered, wringing her hands. The awfulness of her situation made one sad fact more painful. She wanted to eat. I have no proper pride, she thought despairingly. How is it possible to be so hungry? Then astonishment overcame her. From the floor above she heard movement, laughter, quick footsteps, the tinkle of a piano. It even seemed that a few pairs of girls were dancing. What does this mean? She thought. So one is allowed to enjoy oneself here? At that very instant there was a knock at the door, and Miss Malinovska came in, smiling. "Now it is our turn," she said. "Would you be so kind?" She took Magda by the hand and conducted her to her mother's room, where there was a table set for 3 and a steaming tureen. "For goodness sake, I will never have any sense," thought Magda, laughing inwardly at herself. Despair had left her, and appetite now gained the upper hand. "I can begin to catch my breath," Miss Malinovska remarked after the boiled beef. "To tell you the truth, sometimes I am tempted to envy you because your school in that place, Ikshunov, did not succeed." "Oh, I will go back and establish a school, even with only 2 classes, beginner's class and first form," Magda replied, wishing to reassure the housekeeper. "And 2 classes will wear you to a frazzle, especially in the beginning. We know something about that, do we not, Mamma?" "Oh," sighed the old lady, clapping both hands to her head. "Why, when you got this school, Christ have mercy, I tell you, miss," she said, turning to Magda, "how many tears I shed, how many sleepless nights I spent in that first quarter, but oh, Filunia is a woman of iron." "Will you let me come to you sometimes and observe your methods of operation?" Magda asked the headmistress timidly. "Yes, indeed, but what will you see here, my dear? One must rise very early, go to sleep very late, attend to everything. Most important, one must assign responsibility to each person at the outset, and no concessions. Mrs. Latter, when she did not dismiss the first boarder who came back late from her parents' home, was a lost woman. The student's visit with Miss Howard, Joanna's walks, began from that moment. Well, enough about that. Do you know Mrs. Korkovich, for whom you will be working presently?" "I know her girls. I saw her, I believe, one time." "And I do not know her. I hear that they are wealthy people, nouveau riche, and that the lady wants her daughters to be well educated. Let it be understood that if it is not a good situation for you, we will find you other employment, and perhaps a position will even become available here." "Oh, that would be best of all!" Magda exclaimed, clasping her hands. Miss Malinovska nodded. "Well, now, ask your colleagues, are they so delighted?" she said. "But it is difficult. I do not want to follow in Mrs. Latter's footsteps." After lunch the headmistress hurried upstairs, where, in spite of her presence, the students' noisy chatter did not quiet down. Nevertheless, at 4:45 she came to Magda's room. "Dress now," she said. "We are going. I will send your trunk in an hour." When Magda was alone again, anxiety seized her. How would Mrs. Korkovich receive her? Perhaps her demands would be as rigorous as those of Miss Malinovska's school. Her face was pale and her hands trembled as she put on her wraps. And because she was alone in the room, she crossed herself, knelt, and asked God to bless her at this crucial moment of her life. Chapter 2. A House with a Governess.
The headmistress opened the door slightly and called to Magda. They went out to the street, got into a cab, and in a few minutes found themselves at the front door of an elegant house. Miss Malinowska pulled the crystal handle of a bell beside the door, which a footman in a navy-blue frock coat and red vest opened. "Who may I say has arrived?" he asked.
"Two ladies who are expected at 5 o'clock," answered Miss Malinowska, entering the anteroom. They had not yet managed to remove their wraps when a short, stout, bustling lady emerged from the drawing-room. She wore a silver gown with a long train and a lace collar. She carried a lace handkerchief in one hand and an ivory fan in the other. 2 large diamonds glittered in her ears.
"How grateful I am that the headmistress herself takes the trouble!" the lady exclaimed, embracing Miss Malinowska. "I am so happy to meet you at last," she added, turning to Magda. "Please come to the drawing-room, ladies. Jan, tell the young ladies to come here directly. Please, sit down, ladies. Oh, on these chairs." She pulled up 2 gilt chairs covered with wine-red silk. "When will the Solskys arrive?" the lady said next, looking at Magda. "Mr. Solsky has an estate next to my husband's property. Quite an estate. Forests, meadows, and extensive grounds. 9,000 acres, if you can believe it. My husband says that it would be possible to put a sugar factory there very cheaply and get a huge income from it."
"You correspond regularly with Miss Solska?"
she asked Magda again. "Yes, I have written her a few times," Magda replied, a little perplexed about how she ought to answer. "What, a few times?" the lady exclaimed. "Anyone so fortunate as to have a friend in that sphere should be writing to her constantly. I am enchanted with Miss Solska. Such intelligence, modesty, distinction." "You know Miss Solska, madam?" Magda inquired, now looking at the portly woman with proper composure. "I have not personally had the honor, but Mr. Zagierski has told me so much about her that I was even bold enough to ask her for a contribution so a hospital could be established in our district. And you know what? She replied most courteously and sent 1,000 rubles." Mrs. Korkovich's plump cheeks began to tremble. "Pardon me," she said, blinking, "but I cannot recall that incident without emotion. She is the one person, hers is the one house on which I would first leave my visiting card. I so admire the Solskys, and such close neighbors." During a long, rapid monologue by the mistress of the house, Magda beamed with delight. What good fortune to have found a place with a family that so loved her friend! And how noble Mrs. Korkovich herself must be to appreciate Ada's qualities without knowing her. Miss Malinowska's face, on the other hand, expressed nothing, though it might with equal likelihood have been registering either weariness or derision. She sat erect, gazing her large eyes in such a way that it was impossible to tell on what exactly she was fixing her attention. On Mrs. Korkovich? On the various sets of furniture in her drawing-room? Or on the 2 enormous carpets on the floor, one dark cherry, the other pale yellow? When their hostess raised a lace handkerchief to her lips, as if to signify that she had finished giving voice to her transport of feeling, Miss Malinowska spoke up. "What will be Miss Brzeska's duties here?" The stout lady was caught off guard. "Duties? None. To be a companion to my daughters so that under her tutelage they acquire beautiful habits, to help them with their studies, and to supervise them properly. My girls take lessons from professors, from teachers of reputation." "And what will you pay Miss Brzeska? As I recall, 300 rubles a year," said the lady. "Yes, 300 rubles," Miss Malinowska repeated. Turning to Magda, who was frightened and embarrassed, she added, "During the year you will have 1 free week at Christmas, another at Easter, and a month's holiday in the summer, during which you may visit your parents." "Of course," Mrs. Korkovich affirmed.
and it is understood that in Mrs. Korkovich's home you will be treated as an elder daughter." "Even better. I know indeed whom I am taking." "And now, madam, you will allow me to see Miss Brzeska's room," the headmistress continued, rising from her gilt chair as coolly as if it were the most commonplace stool. "Room?" Mrs. Korkovich echoed. "Ah, yes, a room for Miss Brzeska. This way, please." Mechanically, Magda followed Miss Malinovska while their hostess bustled along in front, guiding them through a long series of small drawing rooms and studies, until they found themselves in a room not large but spotless, with a view of the garden. "I will order a bed to be brought directly," said the mistress of the house. "My daughter's room is next door, and my son's on the next floor." "Oh, see, here you have an ashtray in case some time you should learn to smoke," Miss Malinovska said to Magda. "Oh, that is my son's ashtray. He likes to take a nap here sometimes, to read after dinner," rejoined their hostess, a little discomfited. "But he will never come in from now on." "Good-bye, madam," Miss Malinovska said abruptly, pressing the lady's hand. "Thank you for clarifying the terms of Miss Brzeska's employment. Magda, be well, work to the best of your ability, and remember that my home is at your disposal at any time. That is, until the arrival of the Solskys, in whose place I serve temporarily as your friend and protector," she concluded with an emphasis that was not to be missed. "Ah," sighed Mrs. Korkovich, looking at Magda with a face full of motherly affection, "I assure you that the Solskys will be satisfied." When, after this tour of inspection, the ladies returned to the drawing-room, they found two girls, full-figured, prettily dressed, and perhaps laced too tightly into corsets. Both were blonde with graceful features, but one was frowning as if she were angry, while the other's eyebrow were raised and her lips parted as if she were frightened. "May I present my daughters?" said the hostess. "Paulina, Stanisława." As both girls curtsied before Miss Malinovska in the best style, Stanisława raised her eyebrows still higher, and even gloomier creases appeared on Paulina's forehead. "Miss Brzeska," their mother announced. "Oh, we know each other," cried Magda, kissing the blushing girls. They responded with friendly smiles, though one was slightly shadowed with bitterness, the other with melancholy. "Good-bye, madam," Miss Malinovska said again. "Magda, let us see each other soon. Good-bye, my children." Magda accompanied her to the stairs and whispered as she kissed her wrist, "Heavens, how frightened I am!" "Put your mind at ease," replied Miss Malinovska. "I know employers of this sort, and I know what is important to them." When Magda returned to the drawing-room, Mrs. Korkovich moved away from a cluster of gilt furniture and seated herself in a velvet armchair, motioning Magda to a smaller chair. "You have had the pleasure of knowing Miss Solska for a long time?" she asked. At that instant the girls seized Magda's hands and sang out at once, "Is Venslovna still at the school? Have you heard about Mrs. Ladder?" "Linka, Stasia!" their mother said sternly, striking the arm of her chair. "How many times have I told you that well-brought-up young ladies should not interrupt their elders? A moment. Oh, I have forgotten what I wanted to ask Miss Brzeska." "About the Solskys, of course, those people whose estate is next to Papa's brewery," Paulina replied with a pout. "Linka," her mother said threateningly. "Linka, your behavior will drive your mother to her grave. Remember, I have only recently returned from Carlsbad." "But you are already eating cucumbers with sour cream," Stasia put in. "I may eat anything, for I know what I am doing," the lady retorted. "But well-bred young ladies should not. Linka, you will soon be sitting on Miss Brzeska's lap." "But once I sat there at school." "That is not the same." A powerful bass voice rang from the anteroom. "I told you, you fool, not to dress yourself up like a monkey." "Madam ordered," answered another voice. The door opened, and a heavily bearded man walked into the drawing-room, still wearing a hat.
"What is this, a masquerade today?" he said loudly. "Why the devil—"
He stopped speaking and removed his hat when he noticed Magda. "My husband," the lady said quickly. "Miss Brzeska." Korkovich looked at Magda for a moment, and his face, the face of a warm-hearted man, registered surprise.
"Ah,"
he said, drawing out the syllable. "A very dear friend of the Solskys?"
"Eh?"
he replied indifferently, then took Magda's hand in his large palms and added,
"So you are going to teach our girls? Take pity on them. They are silly, but good at heart."
"My dear Pyotr!" his wife said reprovingly, ceremoniously adjusting her lace collar.
"My Tanya, do you want to pull the wool over the teacher's eyes? She will see through your daughters at once, as tavern keepers spot a beer too newly brewed. What now, has that loafer come home?"
"I do not understand you, Pyotr," his wife replied, obviously displeased.
"Papa is asking if Bronik has come home," Paulina offered.
"A fine impression Miss Brzeska will have of our house," the lady burst out. "You have just walked in, and already you have presented yourself as a common person."
"For a fact, that's what I have always been,"
he replied, opening his arms wide in astonishment.
"Miss Brzeziskina, or whatever her name is, won't pay my bills even if I put on airs with her. And that rascal, I didn't wallop him when he was a nipper, and now he's walloping me."
"Whatever are you saying? What is happening to you?" exclaimed Mrs. Korkovich, seeing that Magda was terrified and both her daughters were laughing.
"What am I saying? That good-for-nothing didn't pay my note at the bank yesterday, and if it hadn't been for honest old Svitek, the liquidators would have moved against me. That robber!"
"Indeed, Bronik did not lose that money. He was only late," the indignant mother broke in.
"How eloquently you defend him when he hasn't a leg to stand on. If he had diverted even a penny of that money, he would be a thief, and that's what an idler is," the father shouted.
A purple flush appeared on the lady's face. She rose from her chair and said breathlessly to Magda, "Please go with the girls to their room. Oh, my dear, such a scene in front of someone who does not know us." Pale from strain, Magda left the drawing-room, but the girls' humor was undisturbed. When they found themselves in their room, Paulina turned and faced Magda, looking her in the eye, and said, "Are you afraid of Papa, miss? Do you think he is really so terrifying?" She inclined her head archly. "No one here is afraid of him, not even Stasia."
"You see, miss, this is what Papa does," Stasia chimed in. "If he is cross with Mama, he will say nothing to her. He will only flare up at her in front of us. And when Bronik gets into mischief, again Papa says nothing to him, but blusters out threats at him, to us or to Mama."
"Now he will fuss about all of us to you," Paulina put in. "Oh, I can tell that he likes you very much."
"So does Mama," added Stasia.
"Mama said yesterday that if you had used your wits and bargained a little, you could have gotten 500 rubles a year from us."
"My Stasia, Miss will get it,"
Paulina cut in. "Children, why are you letting the cat out of the bag?" Magda exclaimed, smiling. "Whoever heard of such betrayal of family secrets?"
"But do you not belong to our family?"
said Stasia, flinging herself on Magda's neck.
"You have been with us for an hour, but it seems like 100 years to me."
"I see that you will love that little fawning creature more than me, but I am more attached to you, even though I'm not pulling off your gown," Paulina declared peevishly, nestling into Magda's arm.
"I will love you both alike.
Only tell me, what are you studying?" replied Magda, kissing each one in turn, first Stasia, and then Linka, next Linka, and then Stasia.
"I will tell you," cried Stasia. "From the time we left the school until the holidays, we have studied everything. Literature, history, algebra, French."
Since the holidays we have studied nothing, Linka interjected. I beg your pardon, I study the piano, Stasia cut in. You are in love with Mr. Stukalski, who berates you for having fingers that were made for peeling potatoes. My Linka, you yourself are infatuated with Mr. Zacharalski, and no sooner are you in love than you think everyone else must be, Stasia retorted, blushing. Quiet, children, Magda soothed them. Who is Mr. Zacharalski? A painter. He teaches Linka to paint, and Papa asks when the two of them will varnish our floors, for floor polishers cost a great deal. And Mr. Stukalski teaches Stasia to play the piano, and through half of each lesson spreads her fingers out on the keys. Never fear, Mama noticed that not enough music was to be heard during those lessons. I vowed that if he were taking 1 ruble instead of 2, this solicitude would end. And I suppose your dear Zacharalski would be teaching you for free. He would do just that, Linka retorted indignantly, because I have a feeling for nature. Oh, yes, when he set you to painting a basket of cherries, you ate the cherries, scattered the leaves outside the window, and then fell ill with a headache. Heavens, children, said Magda, the peacemaker, you would do better to tell me, where did these lessons take place? Piano lessons upstairs. I paint in the orangery, and other lessons are held, or are going to be held, in the lecture room, Linka explained. I will take you there, Stasia said. I will too. They seized Magda's arms and conducted her through a series of studies, corridors, and anterooms to a much larger room. It was dark, so Linka, who had found some matches, lighted 4 gas lamps and said, Here is our lecture hall, where the linen was pressed during the holidays. I beg your pardon, trunks full of furs sat here, Stasia corrected her. Magda marveled at the spacious room. In it were several upholstered benches standing before elegant little tables, a big blackboard like the one at the school, and, most impressive of all, a cabinet with taxidermist specimens, and another full of apparatus for the study of physics. Why so many benches? Magda inquired. Because Mama wants to gather a group of girls here to be lectured by the best professors, said Linka. And what are these instruments for? Are you studying physics? Not yet, Stasia said hastily. But you see, miss, this is how it was. Mama found out that Miss Solska owned such things, so she very soon bought them for us. And they sit here unused? Indeed, said Linka. Bronick was smothering mice in the compressed air machine, so Papa smashed its glass cover. He shouted at Bronick and locked the cabinet, but he will give you the key. Magda spent half an hour looking around the schoolroom before a footman in a frock-coat finally informed the ladies that it was tea-time. I would like to wash my hands, Magda said. We will go to your room, Stasia exclaimed. Linka, turn off the gas, and I will take the matches. Again they walked through a hall, a dressing-room, and a lighted corridor. They stopped in front of one door. Stasia lighted a match, Linka pushed at the door, and suddenly Magda smelled a strong aroma of tobacco. At the same instant she heard a man's voice. Out of here! What are you doing here? A scrape, a stomp, and up from a chaise longue sprang a heavy-set young fellow in an undershirt. Fortunately, the match went out. What are you doing here, titmice? The young man asked drowsily. What are you doing here? This is Miss Brzeska's room, cried both the girls. Go to blazes, he muttered, trying to shut the door, with Linka resisting. Then another door opened farther down the hall, and out of it hurried Mr. and Mrs. Korkovich, followed by the footman with a candelabrum. What are you doing, Bronick? Mrs. Korkovich anxiously asked the young man, who was taking refuge behind a cabinet and putting on a coat. And where is the bed? She added when the candlelight had illuminated the interior of the room. Jan, Where is the bed for Miss Brzeska?"
"Up there in the young master's room."
"Are you out of your mind?" the lady moaned.
"Indeed, madam ordered that the bed be put in the room where the young master sleeps."
"But where he sleeps after luncheon. What a fool!" said the irritated woman.
"So Mr. Bolesław sleeps there after luncheon, and here just at evening time," the footman explained.
"Open the window. Bring the bed from up there. Good for nothing."
"Hey, I see that long ago I neglected to oil the machines in this factory,"
declared Mr. Korkovich. He seized the candelabrum from the servant's hands, took him by the back of his neck, and pushed him out to the dressing-room. In a moment there was a shout and the sound of 2 dull blows. "Come, everyone, to the dining-room," Mrs. Korkovich sighed. "How awful the servants have been today." When they were all seated at the table, she turned to Magda. "My son, Bolesław, ask Miss Brzeska pardon for your awkward behavior." The fat young man bowed very low to Magda and growled,
I apologize, madam, though I swear to God I don't know what for."
"What for? Because you had the temerity to sleep in her room."
"Everyone throws it up to me for sleeping. After all, a fellow must sleep."
The older man came in.
"Well," he exclaimed to his son. "Well, tell me, how was it yesterday with the bank?"
"Papa is already trying to make a scene," his son retorted.
"On my word of honor, I will move out of this house."
"Please, Pyotr, leave him alone," the mother interposed. "Ring, Stasha." Jan came in, covering his nose with a handkerchief.
"Why aren't you serving the tea?"
the master demanded. "Because I am leaving this family service."
"What does that mean?"
said the master of the house threateningly. "Just so," replied the servant. "The master continually abuses a man, and then is surprised when—"
Well, 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 don't run on. Nothing so very bad has happened to you."
"It's easier for the master to give a beating than for me to take it," Jan muttered. Terrified and astonished, Magda thought to herself that the Korkovich household was very odd. Chapter 3. What it is to teach other people's children. Mrs. Korkovich possessed dictatorial power over the house. The servants feared her and her alone. Her husband gave way to her. No directives but hers inspired obedience in her daughters, or even in her beloved son, who listened to his father very little. She wielded authority over everyone, with more resistance from some, less from others. She was more than a little surprised, then, when after some time she noticed the force of a new personality becoming more evident in the house, Magda's. This Magda, cheerful, courteous, even to the servants, never resisted the mother's authority, but, more resolutely obedient than Linka and Stasia, became more important every day. Everyone felt her presence, above all the lady of the house herself, though she did not understand how it had come to be so. Within a very few days after Magda's arrival, Mrs. Korkovich had ceremoniously summoned her to the drawing-room to express her wishes concerning the direction of her daughter's education. Miss Brzeska," Mrs. Korkovich began, settling herself on the sofa, "you must visit Miss Malinovska and ask her which professors she recommends for my girls. In any case, yes, I think my husband must invite Mr. Romanovich, for in April he gave a lecture in the City Hall, and in the autumn will give another. Well, in addition to Mr. Romanovich, we will take several more—" "Excuse me, madam," Magda said. "Why do our girls need professors?" Mrs. Korkovich flinched. "Why? What do you mean?" "It is not certain whether lectures are useful just now," Magda explained, "and they are very expensive. If we had only 2 such lessons a day at 2 rubles an hour, that amounts to around 100 rubles a month. My salary together with music and art lessons costs 90 rubles, so everything together would cost nearly 200.
200? The lady repeated, taken aback. I had not thought of that. But we will have a group of 10 young ladies, so for each one the cost will come to perhaps 20 rubles, perhaps less.
And do you already have a group?
I am just now attending to that, but at the moment, no, Mrs. Korkovich said with a touch of pathos in her voice.
And so, madam, let us proceed in this way. As soon as you form a group, we will approach the professors, and in the meantime I will review with the girls what they learned at Mrs. Ladder's school, some of which they have forgotten.
200 rubles a month, the lady whispered, rubbing her face with her handkerchief. Of course, we must wait.
After calming herself for a moment, she added,
I have an idea. I will set about forming a group, and you will ask Miss Malinovska to help select the most suitable professors. In the meantime, you and the girls will review what they learned at school.
Very good, ma'am.
Mrs. Korkovich was satisfied that the final order had come from her lips, and that Magda had undertaken to carry it out with no opposition. She was satisfied, but somewhere in her mind a vague uneasiness remained. 200 rubles, she thought. Why was I not aware of that at once? Well, it is her responsibility as a governess to think of such things. That was only the beginning. From time immemorial, Mr. Korkovich had had the habit of sitting down to the midday dinner on hot days without a jacket. One day, late in August, there was such a sweltering heat that he sat down at the table without even a vest, and he unfastened the front of his shirt, leaving all too visible his florid chest with its generous covering of hair. Bronisław seated himself by his mother. The footman hurried out to call the young ladies, and the next moment Linka and Stasia entered the room with Magda behind them. "Our respects to Miss Magdalena!" exclaimed the master, leaning forward so that the opening of his shirt yawned wider. "Oh!" cried Magda, and withdrew toward the door. Bronisław rose from his seat. Mr. Korkovich demanded in astonishment, "What happened?"
"What do you mean, what happened?" said Linka. "Why, Papa is undressed."
"Oh, damn!" grumbled the master, clapping his hands to his head. "Ask Miss Magdalena to come back. Devil take it!" He ran to his room, and a few minutes later returned, attired as if he had emerged from a fashionable store. At that moment Magda was entering the room again, so he apologized with many bows and assured her that the unhappy incident would not be repeated. "At your age, Pyotr, many allowances may be made," his wife observed acridly. "Many or not many," Bronisław remarked. "The English wear frock coats at luncheon." "Miss Magdalena has no cause to be offended," said his mother. "But remember, Pyotr, how many times I have asked you not to come to dinner carelessly dressed. It is important to observe social forms, even if only for the girls' sake." When the meal ended, Magda told Mrs. Korkovich that she wanted to visit Mr. Dembitsky. "Dembitsky? Dembitsky?" the lady repeated, frowning slightly. "That librarian and friend of Solsky's," her husband explained. Mrs. Korkovich beamed. "Ah," she smiled, "you want to find out when the Solskys are arriving. Yes, you are welcome to go." "And I will accompany you," Bronisław exclaimed, springing up from his chair. "Thank you, no," Magda answered him in a tone so cool that Mrs. Korkovich winced. "What, are you embarrassed?" Bronisław said, smiling. "If we meet anyone, I will say that I am your third pupil." "You are too big." "Then you must say that I am your tutor." "You are too young," Magda said, cutting off the banter. "Goodbye, ladies and gentlemen." Stasia ran out of the room after Magda, while Linka brandished her fist at her brother and said angrily,
Listen, if you treat Miss Magdalena so, I will scratch your eyes out."
"She is right to say so," their father added. "You must be a blockhead to try to force yourself on a decent girl." "Decent, eh?" the beefy young man retorted belittlingly. "Decent girls don't have watches set with diamonds." "What is the beast saying?" his father asked. "I know what I am saying," Bronisław insisted. "The watch is worth 400 rubles. Where would a governess get that?"
"I know," cried Linka. "Oh, about a week ago, Stasia and I looked at that watch. Lovely. Even Mamma does not have such a watch. Stasia opened the cover and we read the inscription. For dearest Magda, in memory of the years circa 1870. Your eternally loving Ada." "Ada, that is Miss Solska," she concluded.
"Such an inscription, really?" asked Mrs. Korkovich.
"Upon my word, we both know it by heart."
"Why, you have a watch with diamonds, you silly thing," sighed Mr. Korkovich, striking the table with his hand.
"Please, Bronik, be on your best behavior with Miss Brzeska," said his mother solemnly.
"I know whom I have brought into our home."
Bronisław grew sullen. "Stupid Bronik! Stupid Bronik!" sang Linka, laughing and jumping about.
"But, Linka, not a word of what was said here to Miss Brzeska," her mother admonished. "You would drive Mamma to her grave."
When her family had gone out, Mr. Korkovich to attend to business in town, Bronisław to take a nap, and Linka to assist Stasia at her piano lesson, Mrs. Korkovich retired to her sitting room, seated herself in a rocking chair, and began to reflect. Does it appear that our governess is exceeding the limits of her position? Pyotr dressed up for her at dinner. Well, he ought to break his appalling habits. Linka defended her like a lioness. There is nothing wrong in that. Anyway, Bronik spoke disparagingly to her. But the boy must be courteous to her, and so must even I, and all of us. Such connections for 30 rubles a month. A gold watch with diamonds? If we do not make friends with the Solskys now, we never will. By the way, at the first opportunity I will give that young woman to understand what I am and what she is. The chair rocked more and more slowly. Mrs. Korkovich's head fell onto the cushion that hung from its back, and now and then loud snoring emanated from her half-open mouth. Sleep, the brother of death, sealed the eyelids of the distinguished lady. Stokalski had finished initiating his people into the mysteries of the difficult art of fingering, and had not neglected to remind her that she ought to peel potatoes. The girls had hurried to the garden, where an angry Linka sat on the swing and a tearful Stasia pushed her, when Magda came into Mrs. Korkovich's study and found her in the rocking-chair with her head thrown back and her fingers entwined on her bosom. "Oh, excuse me," Magda whispered involuntarily. "What? What's that?" the lady exclaimed, rousing. "Ah, it is you. I was just thinking. What did you learn about the Solskys, dear?" "They will return at the end of October, but in the beginning one of the party will arrive in Warsaw." For a moment Magda seemed out of breath. "Mr. Solsky?" "No, Mr. Norsky," Magda replied quietly. "The son of the deceased Mrs. Ladder." "Of Mrs. Ladder?" Mrs. Korkovich echoed. "The one whose sister Mr. Solsky is going to marry?" "So it is said." "I must meet Mr. Norsky, even if only to make partial restitution for involuntarily injuring him. I am afraid," said the lady, sighing and wagging her head, "that my removing my daughters from the school was one of the causes of the unhappy Mrs. Ladder's suicide, but God knows I could not have done otherwise, Miss Brzeska. In its last days the school had a very bad reputation, and I am a mother. I am a mother, Miss Brzeska." Magda remembered the day when Linka and Stasia had left the school. It seemed to her, however, that Mrs. Latter had not even been aware of their departure. "I have a great favor to ask," Magda said timidly after a moment's silence. "Will you allow Professor Dembitsky's niece to come and study with our girls?" "She wishes to join the group?" "She has no money for lessons with professors, so she would be taught only by me." "Aha," the lady thought. "Now, young woman, you will understand what I am and what you are." But she said aloud, "Why does a poor girl want to be educated on the same level as my children?" Magda looked at her in astonishment. But, Mrs. Korkovich continued, feeling that she was not speaking to the point. "This Mr. Dembitsky, whom you visited, he is a bachelor?" "A bachelor, but very old. Oh, what a learned man, how noble! Mr. Solsky is very fond of him, and forced him in spite of himself to accept the post as his librarian." "Excuse me," the mistress of the house said suddenly. "That is a lovely watch you have. Is it a souvenir?" "It was given to me by Ada Solska," Magda replied, coloring a little and handing her the watch. "But sometimes I am embarrassed to wear it." "Why?" asked Mrs. Korkovich, opening the cover with some difficulty. "For dearest Magda, why doesn't that girl of Mr. Dembitsky go to Miss Malinovska's school? We could set about finding a way to pay for her." "Her uncle was involved in a painful incident with some pupils and had to leave Mrs. Latter's school. The ugly scene was so frightening to Zosia that now she was afraid to go to any school, so she studies by herself, the poor little thing, with a little help from her uncle." "Ah, if you think that Mr. Dembitsky is such a good man—" "Very good, very." "And that girl is poor, well, let her come, as long as my girls are none the worse for it." "On the contrary, they will profit from it. A little competition will spur them to greater diligence." "I must add, however, that I do this only to maintain good relations with the Solskys. After all, I do not know Mr. Dembitsky." The lady went on, feeling herself more and more in a false position in relation to Magda. Mrs. Korkovich was a bit sharp with Magda for a few days. But when Dembitsky paid her a visit and mentioned that he had known the Solskys since they were children, and that he corresponded with Stefan every few weeks, Mrs. Korkovich was mollified. In fact, she thanked Magda for her part in establishing the new relationship. "Dembitsky would be an ingrate if he did not speak well of us to the Solskys," she thought. "The Brzeska girl, too, ought to speak favorably of us. At any rate, we will try to ingratiate ourselves with her." From that time on, being with the Korkovich family was like being in heaven for Magda. Bronisław was obliged to offer his greetings and farewells with the greatest respect. His father was allowed to make it evident that he liked Magda. In the end, Mrs. Korkovich had Magda seated beside her at the table, and the butler served her immediately after serving the mistress. In spite of Mrs. Korkovich's better inclinations, however, Magda more or less constantly aroused her antagonism. Be as lenient as she might, she had to acknowledge that some of Magda's actions bespoke a good heart but an extraordinary lack of prudence. Once, for example, Lincoln noticed a little girl in the yard, the daughter of a laundress in their very own house. The child was barefoot and wore a shirt so ragged, a dress so covered with patches, that the temptation to make a model of her was irresistible. Linka called her over, made a place for her in the orangery, and began to paint her amid the palms, cactus, and the other exotic plants. Watching this study were Stasia, Mrs. Korkovich, Mr. Korkovich, and even Bronisław, who was in some doubt at any given moment whether his sister was painting a cactus or the leg of the ragged little girl. But it was Magda who noticed just then that the child was coughing hard. "Good God!" she exclaimed. "She's practically naked." Then she added in French, "If the poor thing does not get some clothes and some nursing, she will die." Linka stopped painting. Tears welled up in Stasia's frightened eyes. Both sisters began to observe the coughing child carefully, and discovered that she did not have even the flimsiest of shoes on her feet, that her half-worn-out shirt did not make up for the lack of an underskirt, and that her old pinafore looked more like a spider web than a piece of clothing. From that moment the young women stopped painting the child and began to care for her. Without their mother's knowledge, they put together the money to take her to a doctor. They bought little shoes and stockings, and then linen and fustian, from which they began sewing clothes for her with the help from Magda and the maid. "You see what a good thing it was that you learned to sew at Mrs. Ladder's school," Magda reminded them. When Mrs. Korkovich saw Linka struggling to stitch up fustian on the sewing machine, she thought, as she would have expressed it, that she would fall down dead. Magda was not in the room, so the worthy woman limited herself to conducting an investigation, and, taking the incriminating fabric, rushed with tight lips to her husband's study. In her wake came Linka, who firmly requested that her mother not interfere in her business. "Do you see, Pyotr?" his wife exclaimed, throwing the fustian onto his desk. "Did you ever hear of such a thing?" Then she and Linka each spoke faster than the other of the little ragamuffin, her cough, and the help the young women had given her. Linka dwelt on the child's unhappy state, Mrs. Korkovich on how dirty she was, how contagious her cough might be, and how full of emancipationist notions Magda's head was. When he understood what was afoot, Mr. Korkovich stroked his abundant beard and remarked in a quiet tone that made his spouse very uneasy. "Was the child dirty when you painted her?" "Like a little tarpet, Papa," Linka replied. "And did she cough?" "Oh, she coughed far worse than now." "Go, Linka," said her father in a tone of ominous mildness. "Go and kiss Magdalena's hand for encouraging you to behave so admirably." "But Pyotr, it cannot be!" cried his wife. "I will not allow it." "Tanya," her husband answered when Linka had gone out of the room, "Tanya, do not lose your senses. After all, I see only today that my daughters have hearts. God has sent this Miss Brzeska to us." I know," she said. "You approve of everything Miss Brzeska does, and if I went to my grave today—" "I appeal to your good sense, Tanya. If you must praise Miss Solska for giving you 1,000 rubles for the hospital, do not reprove your own children when they provide an orphan with clothing." "But they are sewing it themselves." "English duchesses also sew clothing for poor children," her husband replied. "Are you sure?" she asked in spite of herself, feeling her anger quickly dissipate. An hour later she complimented her daughters on their efforts on the girl's behalf, and thanked Magda. In her heart, however, she resolved at the first opportunity to point out the flaws in Magda's new-fangled emancipationist ideas, which were sowing discord among the most respectable families. The most serious development in these domestic relationships occurred 6 weeks after Magda's arrival. It happened at the afternoon dinner, during a short pause between the beefsteak and the chicken with cucumber salad, when Linka said angrily to the butler, "Take this plate." "It is clean, if you please, miss," replied Jan, glancing at the plate and putting it back. "You dolt! Take it when I tell you to!" Linka burst out, on edge from a quarrel with Stasia about whether Zacharalski was greater than lesser or only equal to him. "When Miss speaks, that is how it must be," said Mrs. Korkovich sternly. The butler took the plate and placed another one on the table. Then he served the chicken and salad, and finally went out to the kitchen. Then Magda leaned toward Linka, put her arm around her neck, and whispered, "You will not answer Jan in that way the next time, will you?" These harmless words had the effect of a thunderbolt at the table. Stasia raised her eyebrows higher than usual. Bronisław took his fork, which he had been using to pick his teeth, out of his mouth. Mr. Korkovich turned purple,
and lowered his face so that his beard was smeared with the rest of his salad. Linka gasped several times, burst out crying, and ran from the dining room. "Come back for the pudding, though. There will be cream," Bronisław called in a tone of genuine sympathy. "Very good," muttered his father. Mrs. Korkovich was stunned. Because she was an exceptionally shrewd person, however, she adjusted to the situation quickly, and said ceremoniously to Stasia, "In aristocratic homes, young ladies speak with studied politeness to the servants." Mr. Korkovich clapped a hand to his fleshy neck, as though it did not seem to him that this wise dictum from his wife had been spoken in season. The lady as well was concealing her confusion under the pretense of being sure of herself. She was conscious that from that moment her children's relations with the servants had changed, not because of morals inculcated by herself, but because of Magda's remark. She also reminded herself, with some bitterness, that Jan served Magda with alacrity, conversed with her more cheerfully than with the girls, and at the table manipulated the dishes in such a way that the best pieces of everything came Magda's way, though she did not take them. "I see that this is Bismarck in the form of a young woman," she thought, setting aside a double portion of cream for the absent Linka. "On this subject, God knows how many years I have asked Pyotr not to abuse the servants. And long ago I set about telling the girls to be polite in their dealings with people of lower position. Well, and that girl, she got in ahead of me. We will settle our accounts sometime, miss. We will settle our accounts." After dinner, Mrs. Korkovich thanked the governess coolly for her company at the table and ordered Stasia to take Linka her cream. After that, Mr. Korkovich said "thank you" to Magda, held her hand a little too long, and looked her in the eye rather strangely. So when Magda had left the room, the irritated lady said to her husband, "I thought you were going to kiss Miss Brzeska." He nodded. "You know," he replied, "I really wanted to kiss her hand." "In that case, father, I disown you," Bronisław remarked, turning toward the window. "Disown me, my dear boy, at the bank," his father retorted. His wife took the floor. "But you must admit, my dear, that for several weeks Bronik has been improving," she said. "He hardly goes out of the house, and he sits with us regularly at the table." "No doubt he wants to cage a few 100 rubles from me. I know him. I fly into a rage when I see the tricks he plays, though my skin creeps when he begins to amend himself." "You are wrong," said the mother. "Bronik has done nothing wrong, only he has yielded to my persuasions. I have been explaining to him that he behaves improperly, idling about in inappropriate company, that he was driving us to our graves, and he understood me." "Eh," growled the father, "so you always think. You don't know how to manage the girls, and you think such a rip listens to moral suasion?" "Who manages them, then? Who directs their education?" the lady cried, turning as red as a hot iron. But Mr. Korkovich, instead of answering his spouse, turned to his son. "Well, listen," he said, "for you will make a beggar of me, you loafer. Either get yourself to work, so Svitek can go to the brewery in Korkov, or go to Korkov yourself. I cannot be in 2 breweries at the same time when they are 30 miles apart. When I am in Warsaw, something goes wrong in Korkov. When I am in Korkov, there is no supervision here, and you go roaming around the restaurants." "I told you he stays home," the mother put in. "I don't mean that he should sleep the clock around at home," roared the father, "but that, even just a couple times a day, he should look in at the brewery and check on what they're doing." "He took your place for several days." "Yes, and they didn't fill half the orders on time. Damn your—" Suddenly he clapped his hand to his mouth. He did not finish the imprecation, but added calmly, "Be gentle here. Do not call them names. When everyone, beginning with your own son, drives the knives into your liver—"
"I see that Miss Brzeska's lecture has had its effect on you," his wife sniffed.
"No, it is your moralizing," the father retorted, and walked out of the room.
During this time, Bronisław had been standing by the window, drumming on the pane with his fingers and shrugging his shoulders now and then. Mrs. Korkovich wrung her hands, looked tragically at her son, and said, "What do you think?"
"But, well, that when someone is pretty, she is pretty, and there is nothing to say," answered the precocious young man.
"Who? What fancy is this?"
"Magda is pretty and trains the girls well, only she has too many whims. And you, mamma, still beat your little drum to her about those Solskis. Solskis, Solskis! When all is said and done, what of the Solskis? Am I afraid of them, or what?" he said, gesticulating with a phlegmatic air.
Then he kissed his stupefied mother on both hands and went out, grumbling,
"What does the old man think, that I'm going to cart beer around?"
"Merciful heavens!" moaned the lady, holding her hands to her head. "Merciful heavens, what is happening here? What has become of me?" She was so exasperated that when she found herself in the rocking-chair in her sitting-room, she was unable to fall instantly into a postprandial doze. "She does what she pleases with the girls, and they only cry," she thought. "She spoils the servants. She brings children of various undesirables into the house. Bronick himself is delighted at how pretty she is. What do they see about her that is so pretty? And as if it weren't enough that the old bear undermines my influence in the house, he even wants to kiss her hand. No, I must put an end to this." After cooler deliberation, Mrs. Korkovich's reproaches against Magda began to dissipate. After all, she herself had agreed that Zosia could study in her home, and she had done it to establish close relations with the Solskis. After her initial resistance, she had allowed her daughters to provide clothing for the laundress's ragged little girl, and nothing bad had come of it. In fact, everyone in the whole house was talking about their good deed. Finally, well-bred young ladies, and even a husband, ought not to speak abusively to the servants. For what a blow it would be to her maternal feelings if some day Linka, in front of the Solskis or other distinguished guests, called the butler a dolt. But the more Mrs. Korkovich vindicated Magda in her mind, the more resentment toward the teacher awakened in her heart. What an awful state of affairs, to feel an aversion towards someone and have nothing to reproach her with. "What will I say to her?" the lady thought bitterly, "when the girls, my husband, and even Bronick answer that Miss Magdalena does as I wish?" Nor was it proper to let her aversion show. For what if the governess should take offense and leave the house? What would the girls, Bronick, her husband, say then? And above all, what prospect would there be of the longed-for acquaintance with the Solskis? "A strange woman, that Miss Solska," Mrs. Korkovich said to herself, "having a governess for a friend." Chapter 4. Mrs. Korkovich's Anxieties. In early October, Mrs. Korkovich's household was turned on its ear. She herself felt as if she were a shipwrecked sailor sitting on a narrow rock, looking at a raging ocean and only waiting for the waves to engulf her. Her daughters, on whose education she had expended so much money, had not only stopped being peevish to the servants, but, what is more, had become intimate with the maid, the cook, even the butler's family. Often Mrs. Korkovich found both the young ladies in the dressing-room, and at the table she saw with her own eyes that Jan smiled not only at Miss Brzeska, but even at Linka and Stasia. "Let him make such a face at them in front of some distinguished visitor, and I should have to die of shame," she thought. But she did not have the courage to scold Jan about these familiarities, nor was there any point in complaining to her husband, who, since that memorable dinner, not only had not greased Jan's machine, but had even ceased to speak harshly to him before Magda and his daughters. Once Mr. Korkovich was so annoyed that he turned purple and waved his big fists, but the blows fell on the table or the door rather than on Jan's back. "You will die of apoplexy sometime, Pyotr, if you hold your feelings in," said his wife one day when Jan had spilled sauce on him at supper, and instead of shaking the butler by the ear, he struck his own thigh with his fist. "Leave me be," he burst out. "Ever since you went to Carlsbad you have been calling me common. But today, after I have improved my style, you want me to abandon my restraints? Plans fall all over each other in your head as if it were a vat full of malt." "Whereas you do not inconvenience yourself on your wife's account," the lady sighed. Her husband rose from his chair, but, glancing at Magda, sat down so hard that the floor squeaked, and leaned his head on his hands. "What is the meaning of this?" thought the exasperated lady. "That governess really has a hold on my husband." Mrs. Korkovich grew so angry that she got up from the table and went to her sitting room. When her daughters and their teacher hurried after her, she said to Magda in an icy tone, "You, at least, need not take up your time with me. There's nothing the matter with me." Magda withdrew, and Mrs. Korkovich exclaimed angrily to her daughters, "Go away! Go to your teacher!" "What is it, Mamma? What have we done?" both daughters demanded tearfully, baffled by their mother's irritability. Like all impetuous people, Mrs. Korkovich soon quieted down. Sitting in her chair, she said in a more tranquil tone, "Linka, Stasia, look me straight in the eye. You do not love your mamma. You would like to drive your mamma to her grave." The girls were sobbing. "What are you saying, Mamma? Whom do we love?" "Miss Brzeska. She is everything in the house now. I am nothing." "We love Miss Brzeska as a friend, and Mamma as Mamma," Linka rejoined. "You would like for me to go to my grave and for your father to marry your governess." In spite of the tears that were flowing copiously down their faces, both girls began to laugh like madwomen. "And what a pair that would be! Ha ha ha! Whatever would Bronick say about that?" cried Linka, holding her sides. "What clowns they are! Do not laugh at Mamma's words, for the words of a mother are holy. Bronick? What about Bronick?" "Indeed, Bronick is in love with Miss Magdalena, and woos her so that yesterday she was crying, poor thing. Ha ha ha! Papa and Miss Magdalena!" Linka laughed. This information about Bronick's pursuit of Magda completely calmed Mrs. Korkovich. Drawing both daughters to herself, she said, "What is this chatter about Bronick's wooing? Well-brought-up young ladies ought not to know anything about that. Stasia, Linka, look me straight in the eye. Swear that you love Mamma better than Miss Brzeska." "Here, upon my word, 100 times better!" exclaimed Linka. "Miss Magdalena herself tells us over and over that we should love Mamma and Papa more than anything in the world," added Stasia. Among the ladies' fluid emotions, a little friendliness toward Magda surfaced momentarily. "Go and finish your supper," she said to her daughters, adding to herself, "Miss Magdalena may not be a bad child, but what a domineering character! She wants to gain the upper hand over everyone. Ah, well, she has such connections. If one time those Solskys would come to us. What gossip are the girls passing to each other about Bronick again? He makes overtures to Brzeska? It is the first I have heard of any such thing." After a moment, however, Mrs. Korkovich recalled that perhaps it was not the first time she had heard something of that kind. Bronisław's habit of staying at home was undoubtedly the result of her motherly admonitions. But the presence of the beautiful governess might also be wielding its influence over her son. "He is young. There is nothing astonishing in that," she sighed, and remembered how, one evening, Finding herself by chance in an alcove off the corridor, she had heard this interchange between her son and the governess. "Please do not block my way, sir," Magda said crossly. "I would like to convince you that I have a great regard for you," Bolesław had replied in a pleading tone. "Please show your regard by not conversing with me when I am alone." "Excuse me, madam, but before other people—" he began, but could not finish, for Magda had gone. "She is teasing him," Mrs. Korkovich whispered, and then thought, "A young man, wealthy and, well, handsome. Bronick is quite passable as men go, and his advances must be flattering to a young woman. Naturally she will speak of him to Miss Solska, and Miss Solska will notice him, and will set about luring Bronick away for herself out of feminine envy. Good heavens, how perfectly it is all arranging itself! I cannot deny that many things are working in my favor because of Magda." Mrs. Korkovich then found herself in a period of warm feeling for the governess, and from that time Magda would have felt as if she were in heaven for certain, if her emancipationist notions had not filled her employer's mind with fresh bitterness. For some time Linka and Stasia had been neglecting their accomplishments. Linka painted less and less often. The usually docile Stasia began to quarrel with her music teacher, and even to tell others how Mr. Stokalski was growing bald, and each devoted less time to her lessons, the ones in music, the others in painting. Understandably, their alarmed mother investigated the situation and discovered a terrible thing. The girls were using the time allotted for their aesthetic education to tutor Michal, the butler's 8-year-old son. Stasia was teaching him to read, and Linka was showing him how to write. This was too much for Mrs. Korkovich. She decided to have a conversation with the governess. "Miss Brzeska," she would say, "my home is not an elementary school, and my daughters are not teachers." With that object she rang once, then a second time, since Jan was not quick to answer. At last he stood in the doorway. "Why do you not come at once when I ring?" she said, adopting a stern tone. "Ask Miss Brzeska to come here." "A gentleman has just come for Miss Magdalena and is waiting in the hall," replied the butler, handing her a card. "Kazimierz Norski," she read. "Aha! Inform Miss Magdalena." She rose and walked quickly from her sitting-room to the hall. Her anger was dispelled. Excitement now seized her. Norski, she thought. Yes, he was due to arrive in the beginning of October. Perhaps the Solskis are here as well. Her legs trembled under her when she opened the door to the salon, but she was stunned at the sight of the young man who glanced at her and bowed most elegantly. What features! Eyes! Eyebrows! She thought, but said aloud, "Do I have the honor of addressing Mr. Norski? I am... Miss Brzeska is staying with us just now, and I hold the sacred memory of your mother in the greatest respect, sir. Heavens, what an appalling development! I ought not to allude to it, but my daughters were beloved students of your dear departed mother, who was mourned by everyone here." So Mrs. Korkovich said, bowing herself, and motioning him to a gilt chair, on which he sat down unceremoniously. He is lovely, she thought, and because the young man remained silent and looked at the door, she made another remark. Your mother of blessed memory, how is... that is to say... I've just been to her grave, where we want to place a monument. You and your sister must return to society, the lady quickly interrupted him. And in that case, my husband and I and all our household... At that instant, Norski rose from the little gilt chair, looking over the head of his kind hostess. Mrs. Korkovich turned around and saw Magda, pale and resting one hand on a table as if to support herself. Here is Miss Brzeska, Mrs. Korkovich began again. But Norski, ignoring the formalities, approached Magda and took her hand. We know that our mamma spent her last hours with you,
I wish to thank you, and sometime, if it is possible, to hear the details from your own lips," he said in a fine, velvety voice. Magda looked at the slender white cords stitched to the lapel of his coat, and her eyes clouded with tears. "I will tell both of you everything, sometime," she said, not looking at Kazimierz. "Has Helena returned as well?" "She arrives with the Solskis in a week, 10 days," he replied, unable to get the better of his astonishment. "But if you greet them like this—" "Have I offended you?" Magda asked apprehensively. "You could not possibly offend me," he answered warmly, taking her hand again. "But let Madam be my witness," he added, turning to Mrs. Korkovich. "In my deceased mother's home, Miss Magdalena, Ada Solska, my sister, and I were one family. Our mother, as she traveled to her death, sent us her blessing through Miss Magdalena, and today, when I return, after saying farewell to my mother, this, her second daughter, receives me as if I were a stranger. Let Madam say if it is not so." Magda hung her head, unable to hold back her tears. "Happy Miss Magdalena," he said. "I have no more tears to shed." He broke off and knit his beautiful eyebrows as he noticed Bronisław a few steps away. Bronisław had come quietly into the drawing-room, and for several minutes had been looking now at Norski, now at Magda. "Perhaps Mamma will introduce me to this gentleman?" he said. "I am Korkovich, or Corkscrew, as your old friends called me, sir." "You know each other?" asked the perplexed hostess. "My son, Mr. Norski." "We know each other well, or at least I know you by reputation. There are many stories about your pranks at Stepek's," Bronisław broke in, extending his big hand to Norski. The young men shook hands, Kazimierz lackadaisically, Bronisław energetically. One who looked closely, however, could see that there was no sympathy between them. Norski sat for a few minutes, looking rather gloomily and giving brief answers to Mrs. Korkovich's inquiries about the Solskis. After a time he stood up, made his farewells, and promised to visit Magda more often, if Mr. and Mrs. Korkovich would permit him. "We have so much to say to each other about my mother, Miss Magdalena, that sometime you must devote an hour to me alone, as you used to," Kazimierz said upon leaving. When the door of the room had closed behind him, Magda, pensive and confused, said to Mrs. Korkovich, "Jan told me that you wanted to see me, madam?" "Yes, I wanted to tell you how grateful I am to you, dear Miss Magdalena, that my girls are devoting time to teach little Michal. What a beautiful quality compassion is," Mrs. Korkovich answered spiritedly, kissing Magda several times. In the face of the imminent arrival of the Solskis, and given the intimacy that linked the governess to Ada Solska and to Helena, the future Madame Solska, Mrs. Korkovich's anger was dispelled. Let Magda do as she liked in the house, let her daughters clothe and teach every child on the street, if only relations were established with the Solskis. "Bronick hasn't even an inkling of his good fortune," she thought, beaming with joy. But, she called to Magda, who was on her way out of the room, "at the earliest opportunity, please tell Mr. Norski to be so kind as to visit us as often as possible. Our home is always open to him. Goodness, I forgot to invite him to dinner. Please suggest to him very tactfully, Miss Magdalena, that he have dinner with us regularly, and if he does not yet have proper lodgings, let him not stand on ceremony, but come to us until the Solskis arrive, or even longer. Will you do that, dear Miss Magdalena? I will be grateful all my life, because the memory of the deceased Mrs. Latter—" "Please, ma'am, I do not even know if it is fitting for me to speak of this with Mr. Norski," Magda answered uncomfortably. "Not fitting?" marveled the distinguished lady. "After all, in the home of the departed Mrs. Latter,
He, you, and the Solskys were as one family." "So Casimir said," Magda said sadly. "But in his mother's house I was a classroom teacher, nothing more." "And the watch set with diamonds from Miss Solska?" Mrs. Korkovich prodded uneasily. "Ada Solska liked me a little, but that is the end of it. What other connection could there be between a poor girl like me and a wealthy young lady? Ada is very good to everyone." After Magda went out of the room, Mrs. Korkovich turned to her son, who was biting his nails. "Oh ho! Did you notice how she avoided serving as intermediary between us and Norsky? She was hiding something. Did you notice, Bronick?" she said, tapping her forehead with her finger. "Good for her," growled her son. "Why drag such a rotter into the house?" "Bronick!" the lady squealed, striking her fist on the table. "You will drive your mother to her grave if you express yourself like a boor, like your father. I need Norsky to establish a relationship with the Solskys. Do you understand?" Bronisław waved a hand and retorted, yawning, "You have already chosen your go-betweens, Zagierski, Norsky. The Solskys must be rotters as well if they consort with such fellows." His mother's face flushed. "Listen to me," she said angrily. "If you say anything more against Mr. Zagierski, you are no son of mine. A wise man, a well-connected man, a friend of ours." "A friend because he unloaded 3,000 rubles on Dad, the devil knows why, at 12%? It's a laugh that Korkovich borrowed at 12%. "It was very considerate of him. We must find a way to repay him for his good-heartedness to us, even to you," his mother answered. For several days Norsky did not put in an appearance at the Korkovich home. Magda, on the other hand, paid a visit to Dembitsky and returned in a state of agitation. Mrs. Korkovich, who noticed that Magda's eyes were a little wet, asked her with apparent indifference, "And was that Mr. Norsky at Mr. Dembitsky's?" "He was just there," Magda answered, blushing deeply. "We spoke of his mother. He told me that his stepfather is coming here from America with his family." "What stepfather?" "Mrs. Latter's second husband. He served in the Army of the United States, and at present is an industrialist, or sells machinery." Magda's alacrity in supplying these details did not please Mrs. Korkovich. "That little cat is hiding something," she thought. "Would she be scheming against us? Scheming against us and in the home of Dembitsky, whose niece I took in so she could have lessons here? Oh, people are ungrateful creatures." Mrs. Korkovich really was too sensible to suspect Magda of intrigue, but to protect her own interests she decided to give a large evening party and sent her husband to call on Norsky. When Mr. Korkovich had returned, breathing heavily, and was hurriedly removing his best clothes, she asked him uneasily, "What about Norsky? Is he coming?" "Why wouldn't he be coming? Everyone goes where they're given something good to eat." "Eh, Pyotr, you have some prejudice against Norsky. Such a fine-looking fellow, who any day will be Solsky's brother-in-law." "But he must be a bounder," her husband groaned, with difficulty removing a tight boot with a bootjack in the form of a fawn. "What are you blithering?" said his wife. "You are a fine, respectable man, but you will never be a diplomat." "Pshaw! God sent me such a Metternich in a skirt that her cunning could run 2 breweries." Chapter 5. The Soirée and its Hero. On the next Saturday, which fell in the latter half of October, the drawing-rooms in the Korkovich house were brilliantly lit. The stairs were resplendent with carpets and flowers, and the vestibule was full of servants. At their head stood Jan, clean-shaven, wearing a navy-blue swallow tailcoat, a red vest, and yellow trousers. "A true monkey from the Happy Isle," muttered Mr. Korkovich, looking at Jan. Just do not say that out loud, my dear, because people will see that you have bad taste and use boorish expressions," his wife scolded. By around 11 in the evening, perhaps 60 persons had gathered. The majority were from wealthy families in the city, families of brewers, merchants, jewelers, carriage-makers. Ladies decked out in silk and diamonds were seated along the walls, carrying on conversations that began with the theatre and concluded with talk of how servants were growing worse every year. Young women moved eagerly around the corners of every room, seeking out artists and men of letters so as to obtain the latest information about positivism, Darwinism, political economy, and the question, which in these days was being more and more warmly debated, of the role and rights of women. The young manufacturers and merchants went out very soon to smoke cigarettes and make fun of the well-bred young women and the poets, who did not have an unpatched pair of pants among them. Eventually their fathers, powerfully built, solemn men wearing ill-fitting frock coats and jostling against the gilt furniture, cast gloomy looks at their wives and daughters and went to the card-rooms. "A princely affair," said a carriage-maker to a distiller. "They laid out hundreds of roubles." "But can they afford it?" retorted his hearer. "Anyone can be a prince if he has money. Let us sit down. I there, you here." They took seats. Other groups sat at tables nearby, and soon everyone became invisible as the smoke of excellent cigars filled the room. From time to time someone was heard to say, "Pass! 3, no trumps!" "Oh, you rascal!" or "When are you going to listen to the bidding?" At 11:30 there was a murmur in the salons and the card-rooms. Some asked, "What happened?" Others whispered, "He is here." Mothers and aunts nonchalantly turned their eyes toward the door, not, God forbid, because anyone had piqued their interest, but, why, one might as well look. Daughters and nieces, one after the other, broke off their conversations about Darwin and positivism and cast down their eyes, which did not hinder them from seeing everything. Poets, literary people, artists, all the intelligentsia felt suddenly isolated. The young industrialists in the more distant rooms were uneasy and began to put out their cigarettes. Mrs. Korkovich tore her husband away from his card game and hurried with him to the vestibule, where Kazimir Sznorski was removing his overcoat. Zagierski said to one of the maids, "Listen, my dear, keep our coats handy. We must go out." "What an honor this is! How thankful we are!" exclaimed Mrs. Korkovich, holding out both hands to Norsky. Zagierski immediately seized them, diverting the hostess's joyful outburst to himself. "What an honor! Pyotr—" "What, have the Solskys not yet arrived?" she asked. "They are coming in a matter of days," replied Norsky. Jan, in his poppy-red vest and yellow trousers, threw open the door to the drawing-room and called, "The Honorable Mr. Norsky." "Mr. Norsky," Mrs. Korkovich repeated, clinging delightedly to the young man's arm. "The brother in... She is next to..." said Mr. Korkovich, thunderstruck. The lady turned her head and shot her husband such a despairing look that he swore himself to silence. "Did I have to spout such tommy-rot?" he nevertheless whispered to Zagierski. "Ah," Zagierski said with an indignant air, sweetly closing his eyes. The hall grew quiet. Then, here and there, a whisper started up. "What is this? No one else was presented in that style. One would have thought they were bringing in a prince." But the murmur died down. Norsky was so handsome that mothers and aunts looked at him and restrained their bursts of indignation, and daughters and nieces were ready to forgive him anything. "So handsome, it's a mortal sin," the emancipated lady of mature years said to the 18-year-old turtle-dove with sapphire blue eyes. The turtle-dove made no answer, but her heart beat violently. After being presented in this singular way, and exchanging courtesies with the most distinguished ladies, Norski moved suddenly toward the piano. It seemed to those present that at that moment there was an aura around the instrument and the group seated beside it. Who was sitting there? Linka and Stasia Korkovich. And with whom is he speaking so intimately? With the Korkovich family's governess. Who is she? What is her name? That few minutes' conversation with Norski was enough to draw everyone's attention to Magda, whom no one had noticed until then. The older ladies demanded that their hostess introduce Magda to them. The younger ones vied with each other to exchange greetings with Linka and Stasia and take the occasion to become acquainted with Magda. Even the young factory owners began drawing near Magda with measured steps or observing her from a distance. "Well, well," one of them whispered, "a pretty bit. And graceful, like quicksilver. That filly would run away." "With someone," muttered the young distiller, who had a reputation as an athlete. "What do you say, Bronick?" "Eh? Leave me out of it," young Korkovich retorted angrily. "Bloody hell," sighed a fourth young man. "Well, well, well, young gentlemen, button your lips, for that's a decent girl," the older Korkovich said in an undertone. "Why must you take up for her, Papa?" asked Bronisław truculently, standing by the window and looking sideways at the author of his being. Taking advantage of the moment, the pot-bellied Zagierski rolled toward his hostess. Looking at her ingratiatingly, he said in a sweet voice, "Splendid party, upon my word. I could hardly drag Kazik, whom I couldn't keep from carrying me off to Count Sowijalski's." "What is that? He was not going to come to us?" she asked in consternation. "Well, I don't say that. Indeed not. Only it's no wonder if a pampered fellow used to running with others of that feather is keen to get back to those frivolities. Prince Gwizdalski is supposed to be there. Count Rozhizhalski, a brilliant young crowd," Zagierski explained. "But you and he will stay to supper with us?" she said a little crossly. Zagierski twirled up one end of his dyed mustache and piously raised his eyes to heaven. When Mrs. Korkovich had left him, however, he went over to Magda, tenderly pressed her hand, and said in a voice that trembled with emotion, "You may remember me, madam, Zagierski, friend," here he sighed, "of the departed Mrs. Ladder, and, I make bold to claim the honor, also your friend." Having found it taxing to be the object of so much attention from strangers, Magda wished for even a moment's relaxation, so she motioned Zagierski to a chair beside hers. At her invitation he sat down and, inclining his beautifully groomed bald head, which reflected his moods through its varied coloration, began to speak in an affable undertone. "I am very happy to meet you in this house. For half a year I have wished that the Korkovich family might have the pleasure of your society, and I am glad to see that my project has succeeded. Some time ago you heard from Miss Helena?" "Oh, long ago." "Yes," he sighed. "She has not yet recovered from the shock, poor girl. Those children, for so I will always call them to you, Kazik and Helena, are a great concern of mine. In order to secure their future, I must approach the Solskis, and in this you will help me, will you not?" "What can I do?" Magda whispered. "Much. Everything. One word spoken in season, in the right place, one hint to me on the right subjects. Miss Magdalena," he said passionately, "the welfare of those children, the children of your dear friend, matters deeply to me. We both must occupy ourselves with their future. You will help me, I will help you. We are allies. And now, action and discretion." He rose from his chair and looked at Magda as if he were entrusting the future of the world to her.
Then he squeezed her hand suggestively and disappeared in the crowd. With ponderous, clumsy steps, Bronisław approached Magda from the direction of the tiled heating stove. "Has that one been talking your ear off?" he said. "Do not believe anything he says." From the other side of her chair, Bronisław's father appeared. "What confidential information does Mr. Zagierski have to share?" he asked. "I advise you not to have any secrets with him, for he is an old flirt." "A flirt, father? What is that to you?" Bronisław spoke up, looking pointedly at the older man. Their bickering was lost on Magda, who was thinking of Zagierski. She had seen him at Mrs. Ladder's school after that lady's sudden departure, and her impression of him had not been particularly favorable. She had heard something rather unflattering about him, from Marta the housekeeper, she thought. And today both Bronisław and Mr. Korkovich had spoken denigratingly of him. "He is evidently a good man," she thought, "but he has detractors. Of course I would do anything for Helena and Kazimierz, but what can I do?" She was touched by Zagierski's solicitude about Mrs. Ladder's children, and proud that he had taken her into his confidence. Mrs. Korkovich was showering her attention on her guests. Everyone present had an interested question, or a kind word from her. She did her best to be amusing or helpful to each one. She was, therefore, extremely busy, but in spite of that, Magda's success did not escape her attention. Unknown an hour earlier, presented to no one, the governess forgotten in a corner had suddenly become the center of attention. The hero of the evening, Norski, had conversed longest with her, and returned several times to talk to her again. A man as well connected as Zagierski had asked something of her, or confided something to her. Young women hovered around her. Ladies of consequence by virtue of their age and position made her acquaintance. Young men bombarded her with glances from a polite distance. It even seemed, and Mrs. Korkovich rarely erred in such cases, that some dispute had arisen between her husband and son, no doubt because of Magda. It was no wonder, then, that on the smooth brow of the mistress of the house a frown appeared that was out of keeping with the benevolent smile on her lips and the glow on her cheeks. "You take an interest in our teacher. She is pretty, is she not?" Mrs. Korkovich asked Zagierski, who was continually maneuvering so as to be near her. "Oh, I have known her for quite some time," he rejoined. "She is a close friend of Miss Solska's." "You seem rather excited when you were near her." "Because Miss, your teacher can do much in spheres in which I am not exactly well known. She can do much," he added insinuatingly. Two stilettos passed through Mrs. Korkovich's heart at that moment. One was resentment toward Magda, who emerged victorious in every situation. The other was tenderness, genuine tenderness for Magda, because she could do so much in certain spheres. "If she can do so much," the lady thought, "she must help us become acquainted with the Solskis, for, to tell the truth, though Miss Solska is homely, Bronick has too much sense." Supper was served. Bowls of caviar appeared and disappeared, as did piles of oysters, heaps of wild game and farm meat, and buckets, one might almost say, of the finest liquors. Corks shot from champagne bottles so often that Zagierski, as if deaf, ceased listening to his neighbors and gave himself over exclusively to an examination of the contents of dishes and bottles. At around 3 o'clock, all the gentlemen found themselves in a very mellow frame of mind, and at that time an extraordinary psychological phenomenon manifested itself. One set of revelers asserted that Norski had stayed to supper, and that they had seen him. Another group said that that same Norski had slipped away before supper. Then the first set began insisting that Norski had not been there at all, while the others declared that he was there, but in another room. When the host was asked to resolve the dispute, He agreed heartily with both opinions, so in the end no one knew the truth, whether Norski had never existed in the world, or whether at supper there had been several Norskis, who, by design, had guided the conversation in such a way as to perplex the assembled company. And the more energetic gentleman began to protest in an undertone against certain improper jokes when a new development turned the guests' attention in another direction. Bronisław, in a state of infatuation, had kissed the sleek shoulder of an emancipationist who had been diverting him with a treatise on Schopenhauer, and when that preliminary maneuver had been taken in good part, he had followed it up by declaring that he passionately loved her. The maiden, with great presence of mind, immediately shed a tear of joy. Her uncle, a brawny factory owner, who found himself next to Bronisław, began to embrace him and tell all who would hear that he could not wish for a better match for his niece. At that point something most unusual occurred. Young Korkovich rose from his chair, rubbed his eyes like a man who had just awakened from sleep, and without beating around the bush, acknowledged to the woman and her uncle that he had made a mistake, because his affections had another object, whom he had searched for in vain at the table. Fortunately, supper was just ending, so the guests could rise from the table and scatter quickly to their homes. At that painful instant, Providence called Zagierski to save the honor of the Korkovich family. That prudent gentleman not only did not rise from the table with the others, but in the name of propriety loudly protested their departure. Worse yet, he did not leave the house with the majority of the guests. He did not even want to budge from his chair. Finally, one of the servants retrieved his overcoat, put him into a cab, and saw him to his home. As fresh air blew over him, Zagierski forgot about the young Korkovich's misadventure, but recalled his conversation with Magda. "A sweet, sweet girl," he thought. "I must devote some attention to her, and above all I must gain entrée to the Solskis through her. For Mrs. Korkovich will have my head if I do not become acquainted with them." Immediately after the guests had gone, Mrs. Korkovich busied herself with collecting the silver from the servants, while Mr. Korkovich shut himself into his study for a while, in a tête-à-tête with soda-water and lemon. What he was thinking about is unknown, but at 5 a.m. he summoned his wife and son. Bronisław presented such a mournful picture that it would have moved the most stoic of mothers. His face was pale and puffy, his look was bleary, his hair was tousled. At the sight of him, Mrs. Korkovich could hardly keep back her tears, but his father did not appear to be touched. Noticing the soda-water on his father's desk, Bronisław picked up a glass with an uncertain hand and held it to the siphon,